Good morning. Good morning. So, if you're a homeowner or you're actually thinking about becoming a homeowner, you have probably felt what is happening in the real estate market, right? The tension in your gut, that fear that something is just not right. Something is not sitting with you right, especially if you're a homeowner. And especially more so if you've been a homeowner for an extended period of time, or even if you just bought and you've owned a home for a year or maybe even less, right? There was a new survey, and this is what this whole live stream is based around, that came out recently. And it said 70% of Americans are worried about a housing market crash. 70% are worried about a housing market crash. And so many people out there are comparing now in 2025 to 2008. I see the videos all of the time. And I want to say they are all fear based. They might try and make it sound, they'll use numbers and they'll show charts and they'll show graphs and they'll make it seem like what we are heading towards is a crash. There's a couple big creators that I see come up all of the time and they say, we're heading for a crash. We're heading for a crash. They've been saying the same thing for years. So one of the big myths that I'm going to dispel later in this video is comparing 2025 to 2008. So comparing right now to the real estate market crash of 2008 and how they are vastly different, vastly different. So if you've been sitting there thinking like it feels like we're heading towards 2008, especially if you've been a homeowner for that long, if you've owned a home through that period, 2006, 2007, 2008, 9, and 10, then there might feels like there's some similarities. And I really want to focus today's live stream and dispel the myths of this housing market crash that people have, again, been calling for over 5 years now. Even back before 2020, I can remember people coming out and saying, we're heading for a crash. Home values are going to drop 40 or 50% across the US. You know, when you see those headlines, when someone says that home values are dropping 30, 40, 50%, you have to understand that it's a small section, like small sections of the US where those values could be dropping, right? It's not the US as a whole. And that's exactly what I'm going to go into today. And over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to roll with the punches. Having a lot of technical difficulties this morning. Don't have my normal camera on, but I'm going to do this anyway for you guys because I really want to get this message out there. I really want to get this out there because I'm so sick and tired of all the negativity around this housing market. Yes, there is a lot wrong. And we're going to go over all of that today. There is a lot happening in the housing market, but I really want to focus today's topic on, based off of this survey that I saw, where 70% of people feel this way. And I want to acknowledge your feelings. I don't want to say what you're feeling is stupid and what you're feeling is wrong. I want to acknowledge it. And with acknowledging it, I want to give you the information that's out there, the facts that are going to disprove why we are not heading towards a housing market. And I apologize ahead of time if this is shaky because I have you propped up on a couple of books and that's just how we're doing it today. You know, not everything goes to plan, but let me share this with you. Let's get into this content so we can really dive into what the heck is happening. And I want to read you this survey too, because this is very interesting to me. Okay. So here's the survey. Homeowners concerned about a housing market crash. Wow. Okay. I get it. It could feel that way. Absolutely. But let's dive into it a little bit more and pick it apart. As housing inventories remain low in Illinois. Okay. So right off the bat, you have to look at this and be like, okay, well, they're just focusing on one area. That's it. They're focusing on one simple area. Okay. And I'm not saying that the market could be crashing in Illinois. I don't know. I don't study specifics outside of greater Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area. But with an abundance of overall economic uncertainty, a new survey shows a majority of people are concerned about a housing crash. Clever Real Estate reports that 70% of those asked about a housing market crash this year are one in three are worried that they won't be able to afford their housing payments as a result of the economic climate. Okay. So again, I want to acknowledge that feeling because I feel that a lot. And if you see this, homeowners are concerned about a housing market crash. So there's already a disconnect there. There's already a big disconnect between homeowners being concerned about a housing market crash as opposed to people not being able to afford their housing payments as a result of the economic climate. They are different, right? A housing crash and affordability are different. Not saying that one doesn't lead into the one, right? Because a major unaffordability issue could potentially lead to a housing market crash. But we're not seeing that. The data doesn't show that. The numbers don't show that. No matter what you look at, we're not seeing mass unaffordability leading to a housing crash because that would have to be it would have to be a very significant number of homeowners not being able to pay their mortgage. Okay, a significant, and there is a giant portion with certain loan types. And I talked about that recently in a live stream with FHA loans, people that haven't put down 10 or 20%, and they don't have 10 or 20% or more of equity in their home. You know, the people that put down 3% or 3.5% or 5% that purchased within the past year, year and a half, 2 years at an inflated interest rate, and rates haven't gone down enough for people to be able to refinance again. So those people with those government-backed mortgages, they are more susceptible to a housing, not a crash. I'm not going to say a crash, but they're more susceptible to not being able to afford their mortgage payment. But that is a small section. That is such a small section of the overall amount of people who have a loan in America right now. Over 40% have no mortgage. Over 40% of people who own a home in the US right now have zero mortgage. All they pay is property taxes and insurance. Do you think they are susceptible to falling into this not being able to pay? No. I mean, some of them might be for whatever reasons, but if you're talking about over 40% and there are over 95 million owner occupants and a good portion of them don't even have a mortgage, right? So you have to look at those numbers. Tariffs, obviously, the federal government changes and cuts, just overall economic uncertainty, and people seem pretty scared about what's going on. And for more homeowners, except for Gen Z and younger homeowners, they all lived through the Great Recession and know what a housing crash looks like. Okay, I get it. I mean, I lived through it too. I wasn't a homeowner then, but I lived through it, and I can see the comparisons that people try and make, but it's not there. Paisano, this is that guy, Clever Real Estate, said the current climate is keeping some would-be home buyers on the sidelines. Yes, of course. That is very, very true. Some home buyers are on the sidelines right now. They're waiting. I literally was just talking to a friend, and he said he's putting it on hold. Literally today. I mean, as of within the past 30 minutes. So I get that. I understand that a lot of people are doing that. I think the legit concern, Jen, is with affordability is a legit concern. I don't think a housing market crash is a legit concern because there would have to be some serious economic things that happen for it to be a legit concern. And we're not seeing that right now. We found that about 1 in 4 people who plan on buying a home this year are now delaying those plans, specifically about expectations with the economy this year. Okay, what does that have to do with a housing market crash? People waiting to buy? That doesn't have anything to, they might think that something is happening, but that's, again, not what we're seeing. In Illinois, again, he references Illinois again, a lack of inventory is dragging on home sales. I see that too. I see these things happening here in the greater Philadelphia area. But that's not leading up to a housing market crash, right? And then he just talks a little bit about Illinois, right? It's one state of 50. So you can't definitively say we are heading for a housing market crash. Look at what's happening in Illinois. We're heading for a housing market crash. Look at what's happening in Florida and Texas. those, they don't add up, right? They're big states, yeah, of course, but they're only 3 states of 50. I mean, in my market, there's nothing that says we're heading towards a housing market crash. And I'm going to show you the numbers. There is a lot lower risk overall for a system-wide housing crash than in 2008, in a sense that homeowners have a lot more equity. It's just like, this is bonkers, right? Because people look at the headlines and are like, "Oh my God, all these 70% of homeowners." Nowhere in here, nowhere in here does it say how many people he even talked to. Okay, 70% of what? 100 people? I don't know. 1,000 people? Yeah, I mean, 70% of 1,000's a lot. 70% of 10,000, yeah, but it doesn't even say how many people he talked to. But what really bothers me is the headline: homeowners concerned about a housing market crash. Okay. There's no more context to that. Even in the actual article itself, there's no more context to that. That's why to me it seems so unrealistic when talking to people who believe that there is a housing crash coming, and you ask them, "Well, what are you seeing specifically across the entire US for this to happen?" And again, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the comparisons between now, 2025, and 2008 to really help you understand why that is not the truth. Okay. So, moving on, the next section of this live stream, I want to talk about the national market overview, because this is what's important. This is how you're going to really understand. Once you see what I'm showing you, you might be confused, but I'm going to break it down as best as I possibly can so you can understand. But this is how you're really going to be able to make your own determination. Because let's stop thinking about what these bigger influencers are saying, right? And really dig into the numbers, because they can skew the numbers, but the numbers are the numbers, right? And in so many areas, we're not seeing any signs of it slowing down. Yes, affordability is a big issue. I completely understand that, and I'm never going to take that away until it changes, which I highly doubt it will. Here we go. This is Redfin's most recent report. Home prices nationwide were up 2.5% year over year in March. Okay. So, why this is important to understand. When we are heading for a housing crash, home prices would not continue to go up. They wouldn't. They would not be going up. They would be flat or going down year over year. Year over year. In 2024, we were at, inventory wise, of sold units at one of the lowest numbers in 30 years. Okay. So less homes sold in 2024, less sold than in 30 some years. And prices are still going up. So that's a clear indication that we're not heading towards a housing market crash. At the same time, the number of homes sold fell 3.3%. The number of homes for sale rose 15%. So the issue is not as many people have been selling recently, but more people are starting to get some sense of, I can't even say certainty, because we don't even know what the heck is going on in the housing or in the market in general, right? With the current administration, all the things that are happening, tariffs and pausing them, and it's a mess. So what is the housing market like right now? In March of 2025, US home prices were up 2.5% compared to last year. So here's the median sale price. We're at $431,000. That is absolutely insane, in my opinion. I mean, look at this rise. I did this chart 5 years out. So back in March of 2020, we were at around $300,000, and now we're at $431,000, right? And this is another monster reason why I'll talk about it again when I compare 2025, the year right now, to 2008. But this is another huge reason. I mean, look at how much equity. How many people purchased in 2020 or 2021, in 2019, 2018, when I bought with a low interest rate and have a 2.625% like I do, or a 2.75, or a 3%, or 3.5. So many loans, the majority of loans right now, the vast majority of loans have a less than 4.5% interest. Less than 4.5% interest, right? So that means your payment is not nearly what people's payments are now. That means we have a lot of equity in our homes, a lot of equity. So if people get to a point where, as a homeowner, they cannot afford their mortgage anymore, they go to their lender and they say, "Hey, Mr. Lender, I can't afford my mortgage. What options do I have?" The lender presents them with options. They try and restructure the loan and they try and defer payments for a little bit until they get caught up, right? There's a lot of different programs out there. I've talked about them on this channel. A lot of different programs out there. If people get to that point, they try and figure out how to restructure the loan modifications and repayment plans and all this other stuff. And they even get past that point and they're just like, "I can't do this anymore." Let's say they bought in 2020 for $300,000. Okay, I can't afford it. I gotta sell. Okay, well, what can you sell for now? 425, 450? You're gonna make over 100 grand, right? So those homes aren't going into foreclosure because they can sell them and still make money when they sell, which is another big indication, right? The foreclosure rate isn't even close to what it was in 2008. Not even close. Maybe the number of defaults, the 30, 60, 90-day defaults or more, they might be up, but people have significant equity now. And even if you took the portion that have purchased within the past year or year and a half, or even 2 years with a higher interest rate, if you took them, let's just say it was 4 million last year, and in 2023 it was a little over 4 million. It was like 4.2 million. So we're talking about 8.2 million, give or take, homeowners, and a portion of them fall into this category of not being able to pay their mortgage. That's still 8.2 million out of how many people who own a. The last I checked, there were, I believe it was 97 million owner occupants. 97 million people own a home and lived in it. And then there was tens of millions more who own a home as an investment, so they don't live in it. But of the owner occupants, it's about 97 million. 97 million. So of the 8.2 million who bought within the past 2 years who might not be able to keep up right now, let's just say a million of them, which is a super high number, in my opinion, can't pay, go through this process, right? You're talking about a million homes, right? It doesn't add up to a housing crash. It does not add up to a housing crash. And I don't ever want to say definitively that it's not possible for the housing market to crash, because there's always some extreme circumstance that could happen that would lead to a housing market crash. There's always a possibility of that happening. War, economic collapse, stock market, complete collapse, right? There's always something that can happen, but it's not coming up right now. It's not showing right now. The next number we're looking at are the number of homes sold. So we're at 400,000 year over year, which is down, right? So we know that the inventory, we do have a very extreme inventory crisis in a large swath of the US, not everywhere, because you have places like Florida, certain areas of Florida and in Texas that have a significant number of inventory, which, those markets in and of themselves are different than the US as a whole. So we are down with the number of homes sold, 3.3%. You can go all the way back to 2020. We're a little bit less than 2020 numbers, right? So, I mean, the average for a fixed mortgage right now is 6 points. It went up a little bit. I think it's closer to 6.9%. So it's not crazy high, but look at the dip. I mean, it's not as high as it was in October of 2023, close to 8%. We go all the way back, right? So what does this all mean? This is a really good section here. What does this mean? The direction and pace at which home prices are changing are indicators of the strength of the housing market and whether homes are becoming more or less affordable. The median price of homes in the US is currently 431,000. Okay, what does the number of homes sold mean? The direction and pace at which homes are being bought and sold are indicators of how active and strong the housing market is. Okay. Yeah, we understand right now that it's not as strong as it could be. It's not as strong as it was, but there's again no clear indicators that the US housing market as a whole is heading towards a crash. There's just not. There's so many areas like mine in Greater Philadelphia where the inventory levels, the last time I looked, were less than 2 months. Less than 2 months supply of inventory. And the buyer demand is still there. Even with everything going on, the buyer demand is still strong. And that's just one market. So here, look at the top 10 metros in the US with the fastest growing sales price. Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, Missouri, Florida. Even in Florida, the prices are still going high. This is crazy. 27%. Detroit, Michigan, Long Beach, California, Richmond, New York, North Carolina, like all these places, these top 10 metros. So we're talking about the cities that it encompass and outside the suburbs. These are large areas. The home price sales are still going up. They're still going up. Coming down to U.S. housing supply, are there enough homes for sale to meet buyer demand? This is very interesting. Pay attention. In March of 2025, there were 1.81 million homes for sale in the U.S., up 15% year over year. So we can see that the numbers are going up. It definitely is a bit seasonal too. The number of newly listed homes was 613,000 and up 8.5% year over year. And the median days on market was 47, up 6 year over year. So the days on market, they are taking a little bit longer to sell because there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of buyer uncertainty, a lot of buyers backing out, a lot of issues happening that are affecting the housing market, especially with layoffs and tariffs and things getting more expensive and they were supposed to get less expensive. The average month supply is 3 months. Okay. So when it comes to month supply of inventory, this is very important because a strong seller's market is anywhere from 0 months of inventory to 4 months, 4.5 months, right? That's a seller's market. The less it is on that scale, let's just say from 4.5 down, the stronger the seller's market is. The month supply of inventory, we're at 3. And in my market, like I said, we're at 2. The other market that I work in the Pocono Mountains is at like 6. It's crazy, right? It's more of a buyer's market up there. So we're at 3 nationwide. 3 months. That is a strong indicator that we are still in a very strong seller's market. And if you compare it back to, even back to May and in March of 2020, right? It's down. And look how much it was down in 2020. I mean, this is crazy. This was the madness right here. And so many people purchased a home here. And then their values just continue to grow, continue to grow, continue to grow. Right? So there's a lot of equity in the market right now. So it's just going to, again, that leads people to not have to foreclose and just give their house away because they'll sell it. Even if it takes 47 days or 50 days or 60, even if they listed it at 450 and ended up selling it for, 425, but they only owe 300 grand. I mean, you see where I'm going? Like there's too much equity but let's look at demand too, because that's important, you know. Demand. So we're talking about, yes. What does this mean? Month supply of inventory. This is just reiterating what I was saying. The number of homes for sale divided by the number of homes sold indicates how long it would theoretically take for every home that's currently on the market to sell based on the current rate of home selling activity. A market with 6 months supply is considered balanced. That's 6 months. We're half of 6. Strong sellers market. with fewer months indicating a seller's market and more months indicating a buyer's market. Here is housing demand. How competitive is the market? In March of 2025, 27% of homes in the US sold above list price. 27. That's more than a quarter above list price. In what everyone is saying, we're heading towards a crash, but people are still selling for over asking. It's down 2.9 points year over year. There were only 19.7% of homes that had price drops, up from 40% of homes in March. And there was 98.8% sale to list price ratio, down 0.39 points, but still 98.9% had sold close to the list price. That's still really high. That means the demand is still really strong. So no matter what you're hearing from these people who are always calling for a crash, look at how long these people, if you see a housing market crash video, there's these certain big influencers or whatever you want to call them, content creators. I'm not going to mention anyone specifically. Just go back to how long they've been saying it for. If you see someone saying it and it's their first video, it's like, oh, don't listen to them, right? But if you see someone saying it and you can go back 3 years and they're saying the same thing, 4 years they're saying the same, 5, how long? Or eventually they might be right. Eventually. But look at the housing demand. These are the actual numbers. 27% sold above list price. What does this mean? Homes that sell above list price likely receive multiple offers. Multiple offer situation at 27%. That's a lot. That's still a lot. A higher growing percentage of homes selling above list price indicates the housing market is competitive and bidding wars are becoming more common. A lower shrinking suggests that the market is becoming less competitive. The less competitive market can absolutely be happening in certain areas, but this is looking at the US as a whole. Home prices with price drops, 19.7%. The share of homes with price drops is an indicator of sellers struggling to attract buyers. A higher growing share of homes with price drops could suggest that the market is cooling off and shifting towards buyer favors. It could also suggest that sellers are pricing homes too high. There's a difference there, right? There's a difference between buyers becoming more in favor, which again, they are in a lot of different markets, as opposed to people just listing too high because they want to get this number with no basis in reality. It's just a feeling. I feel like I want to get this number. I feel like it. Yeah. I mean, I want to get $500,000 for my 300,000, right? There's a difference there. So a lower shrinking share could reflect that the market is heating up or moving towards sellers' favor. It could also indicate that sellers are pricing homes more realistically. And the home price drop is up, right? It is up. So it's a combination, and I can almost bet the farm on the fact that it's a majority of sellers just trying to get more for their home because that's what they feel they can get for it. Sale price to list price ratio is down, but you're still at 98.8%, give or take, right? So most homes are selling at asking price. That's what this says. Most homes are selling at their asking price across the US. Most of them are. So this is a strong indicator. And these are the most competitive cities. So we have San Jose, we have Richmond, San Francisco. It's always competitive. Alexandria, Anchorage, Alaska. That's interesting. I guess a lot of people are interested in moving there. Yeah. So that's, I mean, in a nutshell, when you want to look at the data and you don't want to get too caught up in what you're hearing from some rando on YouTube, even it just blows my mind. It really blows my mind, right? And I always like to take it back to, I talk about nationwide, and I always look at my area specifically because the median home price in Pennsylvania is up for the entire state, right? So it's 252,000 for the entire state. Now, look, Pennsylvania, it's probably like most states where there are small pockets of Pennsylvania that are very high value areas. So you look at Philly, Philly in and of itself, like the city, I think the last time I looked, it was like 260,000 for the median sale price, which is, it's affordable for most people. But then you go outside the city, in my county, it's like 525,000, right? And so the suburbs of Philly, the suburbs of Pittsburgh are all these areas that bring up the value. And then everything else in between, not that it's like all depressed and crap towns, but there's a lot of areas where you could still buy a home for 60 grand, in Shamokin, PA. You can get a house for 50 grand. I don't know if you want to live there, but you can. But when you look at the market as a whole, um, there's nothing to me that indicates that we're heading towards this housing crash where all these people love to get on here and say that because it gets clicks, right? It absolutely gets clicks. That's why I want to dispel what is happening, what people think is happening, and give them the actual data. Because that way you can see, like, all you have to do is go on that Redfin, the housing market update. You at redfin.com/US housing market, and you can absolutely see what is happening. You don't have to go back and listen to these people because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. I will say, I absolutely will say that there are issues in the housing market. There are absolutely issues. I'm going to share this next article right now to go over it. I do have a sick kid at home, so I can kind of hear her like clawing to get up. She might be knocking at the door soon. Tariffs. Everyone wants to talk about tariffs. 3 ways tariffs could affect the housing market. This is what's making people very, very uncertain. Tariffs stand to affect the already expensive housing market in different ways. Raw materials such as lumber, stone, copper could cost more, making new homes more expensive. People who flip properties face higher prices and will likely increase the cost of appliances, fixtures, cabinetry, and glass. So tariffs are one of the things that are going to raise a lot of uncertainty and raise the cost if they go through the way that the administration wants to go through. And who knows? They put it on pause. They could turn it on tomorrow. So home builders face higher material costs. Raw materials will likely become more expensive. Lumber is a big one, and it imports from Mexico and from Canada. So lumber is the big one. And then again, people who flip houses will also get to feel the pinch. A lot of people flip houses and they provide a lot of inventory to the market. So any tariffs on China, so anything that's coming from China, and this is just had to do with the housing market. We all know like how much other things we import from China that are going to go up. And when people feel the pinch in their pockets, in their wallets, they're less likely to want to buy a home. They are. That happens. That's legit. I understand that completely. But again, that doesn't mean that we're heading towards a housing market crash. And then mortgage rates have already fluctuated. So we saw them dip. We see them going up again, 6.9%, around there, 6.8 right now. And there's just there's just so many different things that could affect where we are in the housing market. The one big topic that I wanted to discuss today is the difference between 2025, where we're at right now, 2025, and 2008. That is the big discussion that I wanted to have because we know consumers are putting off big purchases. We know that. I literally just shared my little anecdotal, evidence to show you just from a friend talking to me, he was telling me that he put off his, just uncertainty. He's going through life changes too. And it's just like buying houses isn't that important. He's like, I just think I'll rent for another year. So for a lot of people, buying isn't really that important. Selling is probably more important for a lot of people because they get into situations where they have to sell. It happens all the time. They have to sell for one reason or another. So I'm going to share this. This is the difference, right? Comparing 2025 to 2008. There is a fantastic article that was done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. I'm going to put this link in the chat right now so you have it. I'm going to put this link in the chat if you want to see it. This details exactly the difference between 2008 and 2025. I just did research and I tried to boil it down to easier to consume content, right? I distilled it down to make it a little bit easier, because all this mumbo jumbo stuff is kind of hard to understand unless you actually know what you're looking for. So, number one, the drivers of price increases in the 2000s boom, primarily fueled by speculative buying and expectations of continuous price appreciation rather than actual demand or rent growth. That is the big one. That is the big one. So many people, especially investors and bigger, smaller investors, big investors, were buying based on speculative growth. They speculated, they thought the values were going to keep going up. That's what they believed, right? And as you know, they got caught with their pants down, and that didn't happen. And there's other issues that led to it not going up as long or as far as they thought it was going to, for as long as they thought it was going to. In the 2020 booms, driven by tangible factors like increased demand, rising rents, and limited housing supply, reflecting genuine market fundamentals. People want to buy now. They're not necessarily buying to rent, they're buying to live. The demand is much stronger now than it was in 2000s. That's a huge factor. Drivers of price increases. Housing supply dynamics. In 2000, significant overbuilding led to a surplus of homes, contributing to the subsequent market crash. The oversupply is what led to the crash. Oversupply. They had more homes built and more homes for sale than there were people interested in buying. It's so simple when you look at it that way, when you break it down from supply and demand. The supply was way higher than the demand, which caused the market to crash. One of the big factors. The supply was way higher than demand. Compared to now, construction has not kept pace with demand, resulting in a housing shortage that supports higher prices. The demand now is way higher than it was back then. A large buying group, me, the millennials, in 2008, I was, how old was I? 19, 20? Was I 20? 19, 20, right? I'm not buying a house then. Even the people that were 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, were like, they're not. But as we got older, our generation, the millennials, are one of the biggest buying generations in the housing market. One of the biggest. And now the demand is sky high because the millennials make up a large portion of the entire US. And we're in the prime home buying age. So demand is stronger now than it was back then. But the supply is way less. Supply is significantly less than it was back then. Significantly. I'm going to share that. Should I? Yeah. I'm going to make a whole separate video going into extreme detail too of what is happening. But the supply now is much, much, much less, but the demand is significantly higher. Mortgage market conditions, and in my opinion, this is the number one factor that led to it. Of course, it's not just one thing, it's always multiple, but this is the number one thing. In the 2000s, prevalence of risky lending practices, including subprime mortgages and minimal oversight, increased financial vulnerability. Subprime mortgage disaster. People were getting loans of up to 125% of the value. And you The no docs, the stated income loans, they were so prevalent. So prevalent. You could have a pulse and say, "Yeah, I make 75 grand." You don't have to show any paperwork. You could get approved to buy a home for over 125% of what it was appraised for. That's insane. There was no oversight, right? And so much more oversight has been put in place, which that is being rolled back a little bit now, which is causing concern, right? I understand that a lot of those regulations that were put in place are being rolled back now. But when you look at the 2020s, it's much stricter lending standards and higher proportion of government-backed loans have created a more stable mortgage environment. You can't just have a pulse and get pre-approved for a loan right now. There are no docs stated income loans, and it's primarily for investors, right? That's for buying an investment property. If you are a first-time home buyer, I don't know of any lender that is going to give you a mortgage as a no doc stated income loan. I've never heard of that, and right now, as a first time home buyer, you have to be approved to buy a home. Now, the lending standards might be a little bit less, meaning you could technically afford, for a VA loan, you can get 100% financing, which, that could lead you into trouble. If you don't have the necessary funds to put down, it's different if you have the funds and you don't use them than if you don't have the funds at all, right? Because there are some lenders that I've seen give loans to people where I thought, I've represented them as buyers and I knew their financial situation and they barely had enough, they got 100% financing and they barely had enough in the bank that if something went wrong and they had to come out of pocket, like that happens, but the vast majority is much stricter lending right now. The standards are way higher now than they were back then. And that protects a lot of people. And that ensures that the housing market isn't going to crash like it did in 2008. And then this is another big one. And I talked about this already, homeowner equity and interest rates. So many homeowners in the 2000s had minimal equity and were susceptible to foreclosure when prices declined. Many homeowners had minimal equity. Again, think about the person who got 125% financing. So that pretty much means if you bought a $200,000 house, the bank will lend you the $200,000 plus 25% more. Right? So when the market crashes and your home is not worth 25% more, but it's worth, 25% less, when you go to sell, you're underwater. You're just letting it go to foreclosure or you're trying to short sell it and you're not making any money and that goes against you, right? That happened so much from 2008 up until 2011, 2012. So much, as opposed to now, homeowners generally possess more equity and benefit from lower fixed interest rates, reducing the risk of widespread defaults. Over 40% of homes that are owner occupants have no mortgage. And then the vast majority left have low interest rates, 4.5% or less, with a lot of equity. I bought my house in 2018 and it could sell for almost double what I bought it. Almost double. That's insane. So look at all the other people who bought from 2012 up until 2020, right? Those number of years, 8 years, if you bought in 2012, my wife bought her house in 2011, and it's worth more than double, right? The one another property that we own that we use as a rental, but she bought it in 2011. That's worth more than double what she paid for it. So there's so many people have significant amounts of equity. If you have a significant amount of equity, you're not going to let your home go to foreclosure. You're not going to short sell your home because you're not underwater. You have equity to sell. I mean, that in and of itself, like how do you feel like we're heading towards a housing crash if so many people could sell and make money when they sell? Geographic spread of price increases in 2000s. Price surges were concentrated in specific regions such as California and Florida. In the 2020s, price increases have been more widespread across various states, indicating a national trend driven by broader demands. Again, there's way more areas that have seen this price growth in the US in the 2020s up until now than have previously, okay? The demand is way higher in the US right now than it was. It's a significant increase, okay? It's a significant increase. So that all that says that to me, based on what I see and I run the numbers, I'm like, okay, we're not heading towards a housing crash. We're not. We're not heading towards a housing crash. Maybe in some markets, prices are dropping significantly. That is absolutely happening, but it's not the US as a whole. And I'm going to do another long form video all about comparing, going more depth, comparing 2025 to 2008. So you really have a strong understanding. I'm going to get a release that in the next few weeks. But look, it's not there. It's not happening. It's okay. Like, you don't have to fear. You have to really just, depending on what you're doing, if you're a homeowner and you're thinking about selling, you know, check your market, what's happening in your market, and make sure that you're making the smart choice. If you're buying, look, I know it's a little bit more expensive. Rates will come down eventually. They will. They fluctuate just like everything does. They'll come down. They'll be below 6%. They'll be in the 5% probably within a year or two. So I hope you got some value from that, guys. Keep watching, keep tuned in. If you have any questions, make sure you just drop them in the comments and I will respond to you.